The sound woke me at exactly 2 a.m. Sharp, urgent. A bark that cut through the November silence like a blade through fabric. I knew immediately it wasn't random. There was too much intention in it, too much precision. Dogs don't bark with that kind of focus unless they're responding to something specific, something that demands attention. My name is Dr. Marianne Holloway, and I've been living above my veterinary clinic for 2 years now, ever since the divorce papers were signed and I needed somewhere to rebuild what was left of my life. The building is old, stone walls thick enough to muffle the sounds of the outside world, wooden floors that creak with the weight of decades, ivy creeping up the exterior like nature's attempt to reclaim what humans had borrowed. Most nights, the silence here feels like a blessing, a reprieve from the chaos of treating injured animals, comforting grieving families, making decisions about life and death that never get easier no matter how many years you've been doing this work. But some nights, when the quiet stretches too long and too deep, it feels like punishment. Like the universe's way of reminding me that I'm alone in ways I never expected to be. I wasn't always like this. Before the accident that took my son Marcus 3 years ago, I used to fill silences with music, with laughter, with the ordinary sounds of a life being lived fully. Now I move through my days with the careful efficiency of someone who has learned that hope can be dangerous, that loving something means accepting the possibility of losing it. Before I tell you what I found behind that door, I need to know something. Can you tell me in the comments where you're watching from? Your country, your city? Sometimes when I'm sitting here in the darkness, listening to sounds that might not be real, I wonder if there are others out there who understand what it means to live in the space between grief and healing. The dog had arrived during the first frost of November, found by a school janitor near the abandoned gymnasium on the outskirts of town. He was thin, shivering, with fur the color of charcoal and amber eyes that seemed to see more than they should. His right hind leg was favoring slightly, not a serious injury, just a sprain that would heal with rest and anti-inflammatory medication. I named him Bran, after a character from a story Marcus used to love about a boy who could see through the eyes of animals. The name felt right somehow, though I couldn't have explained why at the time. In retrospect, maybe some part of me already knew that this dog was going to show me things I'd been refusing to see. For the first 2 days, Bran was the perfect patient. Quiet, cooperative, eating just enough to maintain his strength while his leg healed. He followed me with those intelligent amber eyes, but didn't demand attention or affection the way most strays do. It was like he was studying me, learning my routines, waiting for something I didn't understand. Then came the 3rd night. I was deep in sleep when the barking started. Not the frantic, fearful barking of a dog in distress, but something deliberate and focused. I stumbled out of bed and found Bran standing in the hallway that led to the old storage room at the far end of my apartment. He was facing the door, body rigid with attention, and as I watched, he barked twice more, sharp, purposeful sounds that seemed to demand a response. The storage room had been sealed when I moved in. The previous owner mentioned it had once been part of a prayer space during the building's time as a convent, but renovations had left it empty and unused. I'd never even bothered to find the key. It was just dead space, a repository for the building's forgotten history. But Bran seemed to think otherwise. I checked the hallway for anything that might have triggered his response. No sounds from neighboring buildings, no signs of animals or intruders. Just the closed door and Bran's unwavering attention to whatever lay behind it. The next night, the same thing happened. 2 a.m. exactly. The same position, the same focused barking, the same urgent quality that suggested this wasn't random behavior, but some kind of ritual or communication. By the 5th night, I started keeping a notebook beside my bed, documenting the exact times, the duration of the episodes, any variations in Bran's behavior. The pattern never changed. 2 o'clock in the morning. 3 or 4 sharp barks directed at the storage room door. Then silence until the next night. But it was more than just the barking that concerned me. During the day, Bran began spending increasing amounts of time in that hallway. He would sit facing the door for hours, occasionally tilting his head like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. Once I found him scratching at the base of the door, whining softly, his entire body vibrating with an energy I'd never seen in him before. And if stories like this move your heart the way they move mine, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what happened when I finally opened that door. Because what I discovered would challenge everything I thought I knew about the boundaries between this world and whatever lies beyond it. I tried everything I could think of to redirect his behavior. I moved his bed to different parts of the apartment, closed off the hallway with a baby gate, even played soft music at night to mask any sounds that might be triggering his response. Nothing worked. Bran would always find his way back to that door, always resume his nightly vigil with the same unwavering determination. Sleep became increasingly elusive, not just because of the barking, but because of the dreams that started coming with it. I found myself back in Marcus's bedroom, standing outside his closed door, hearing his voice calling for me, but unable to move, unable to reach him. I would wake with tears on my face and the absolute certainty that something was trying to communicate with me through channels I didn't understand. On the 6th night, I called the building's previous owner. He was a practical man in his 70s who'd owned the property for decades before selling it to me. When I asked about the storage room, he paused for a long moment. "Haven't thought about that space in years," he said finally. "Used to be part of the chapel when the Sisters of Mercy ran this place. We sealed it up during renovations because the floor was unstable. Nothing back there but dust and old religious items we couldn't bear to throw away. Was there ever anything unusual about that room?" Another pause. "Why do you ask?" I told him about Bran's behavior, trying to keep my voice steady and clinical. He listened without interrupting, then sighed deeply. Sister Abigail used to spend a lot of time in that room. She was the last nun to live here before the order moved on. Strange woman, kind but intense. She claimed she could sense things others couldn't. Said the room held memories that needed tending. What happened to her? She passed away in her sleep, must be 20 years ago now. But before she died, she kept talking about a child. Said there was a boy who needed someone to listen, someone to remember. We all assumed it was dementia, but he didn't finish the sentence. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see Marcus's face, could hear his voice asking why I couldn't help him, why I couldn't save him from the car that ran the red light and stole him from me in broad daylight on a Tuesday afternoon that started like any other. When 2 a.m. came and Bran began his ritual barking, something inside me broke open. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, and walked to the hallway where he waited. The door was swollen with age and disuse. Years of humidity had warped the wood, and the lock mechanism was corroded beyond recognition. But the moment I placed my hand on the old brass doorknob, Bran's barking stopped. He sat down beside me, body trembling but eyes calm, as if he'd been waiting for this moment all along. The door opened with a groan of protest. The smell hit me first, musty air thick with decades of neglect. But underneath it, something else. Something floral and familiar that made my chest tighten with recognition. The beam of my flashlight revealed a small, rectangular room with shelves lining the walls. Candles sat in pools of their own melted wax, religious icons covered in dust, and on the far wall, a wooden cross that had broken in half and fallen behind a faded painting of the Madonna cradling an infant. But what made me go white as a sheet, what made my hands shake so violently I nearly dropped the flashlight, wasn't the religious artifacts or the decay. It was the unmistakable scent of Marcus's shampoo. The same brand he'd used every morning before school. The same smell that had lingered in his bedroom for months after the accident, until I finally couldn't bear it anymore and washed everything, trying to erase the sensory memories that brought him back too vividly. And there, folded on the floor, half buried under a layer of dust, was a child's red hoodie, small size, with a logo from the local Little League team that Marcus had played for 2 summers before he died. If you're feeling this moment the way I did when it happened, please leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. It means more than you know, because what I discovered next would convince me that some connections transcend death. that love finds ways to communicate across impossible distances. Bran began pacing in a tight circle around a section of floorboards near the center of the room. He barked once, not in alarm, but with the same insistent quality he'd been using all week. I knelt down and examined the area where he was focused. The boards were loose, fitted together differently than the rest of the floor, as if they'd been removed and replaced multiple times. I pried them up with my fingers, my heart hammering against my ribs. Underneath was a small compartment, maybe 18 inches square, lined with what looked like oiled cloth to protect its contents from moisture. Inside, I found 3 items that would change my understanding of everything that had been happening. An old cassette tape recorder, the kind they used in schools decades ago. A child's bracelet made of braided leather with small silver charms. And a stack of handwritten pages, yellowed with age but still legible, covered in careful cursive writing. The pages were entries from a journal, dated 23 years ago, written by someone who signed herself as Sister Abigail. As I read by flashlight in that dusty, forgotten room, with Bran sitting quietly beside me, I began to understand that I wasn't the first person to experience something impossible in this building. The journal told the story of Timothy, an 8-year-old boy who had lived in the building during its time as a home for children with nowhere else to go. According to Sister Abigail's careful documentation, Timothy had been different from the other children. He claimed he could sense things others couldn't. Emotions, memories, even the presence of people who had died but weren't quite gone. The other children were frightened of him. The staff didn't know what to make of his claims. But Sister Abigail had listened, had taken notes, had tried to understand what Timothy was experiencing rather than dismissing it as imagination or trauma response. The entries described Timothy's growing certainty that he wouldn't live to be an adult, that his gift was somehow tied to his mortality. He told Sister Abigail that when his time came, he would find a way to help others like him, children who had died before they were ready, before they could say goodbye to the people who loved them. And in the final entry, dated just 3 days before Timothy's death from pneumonia, Sister Abigail had written, "He says the dog will come first, that the barking means time is running out for someone who needs to remember that love doesn't end with death." I sat in that room for hours after reading those words, with Marcus's scent somehow still lingering in the air, and Bran's warm presence anchoring me to the present moment. Everything began to make sense, not logical sense, but the deeper kind of understanding that comes when you stop fighting what you can't explain and start accepting what you can feel. From that night forward, Bran never barked at the storage room door again. He slept peacefully through the night, ate with enthusiasm, and even began playing with a tennis ball I found in one of my kitchen drawers. The same brand Marcus used to throw around the clinic's waiting room while I finished up with patients. I hadn't seen that ball in years, but somehow it had found its way back into my daily life just when I needed the reminder that joy was still possible. The nightmares stopped. The crushing weight of grief that had been sitting on my chest for 3 years began to lift, replaced by something I'd almost forgotten existed: peace. Not the absence of sadness, but the presence of something larger, something that made the sadness bearable because it was connected to love that hadn't ended, only transformed. I started hearing things in the quiet moments, soft whispers in the walls that weren't threatening or frightening, but comforting. A young voice, familiar in ways that made my heart ache with recognition, speaking words I felt rather than heard. Bran would always look toward the sound, his tail wagging gently, as if greeting an old friend. I sent Sister Abigail's journal to the town historian, hoping to learn more about Timothy and the children who had lived in this building decades ago. The response I received was both frustrating and somehow perfect in its incompleteness. No official records existed of a Sister Abigail or a boy named Timothy. The convent's files had been lost in a fire years ago, and the few surviving documents made no mention of children living on the premises. But buried in a collection of personal letters donated by a local family, the historian found a single line that made my hands shake when I read it. "The blessed often return through the ones who wait, bringing messages for those who need to hear them most." I don't officially believe in ghosts, As a veterinarian, I'm trained to look for logical explanations, to trust in science and evidence and the things we can measure and verify. But I believe in Bran. I believe in the way he led me to a truth I needed to discover, in the way he helped me understand that some connections are stronger than death, that love finds ways to communicate across distances we can't measure with any earthly instrument. He still watches the hallway sometimes, but now with calm attention rather than urgent need, as if whoever was waiting has finally been heard, whoever needed to be remembered has found their way into someone's heart again. I keep Marcus's red hoodie in a shadow box on my bedroom dresser, and sometimes, when I'm closing up the clinic late at night and turning off the lights, I hear soft footsteps on the stairs leading to my apartment. Small ones, pausing at each step, waiting with the patience of someone who has all the time in the world. When that happens, Bran's tail thumps against the floor. Just once, but with unmistakable joy, like someone finally came home. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. If it touched you, please subscribe, leave your comment below, and know how grateful I am for having you here. Because some doors aren't meant to stay closed forever, and some mysteries are solved not with logic, but with love. In a world that often tells us to move on from our losses, maybe the greatest gift we can receive is the knowledge that love never really ends. It just learns to speak in languages we're still learning to hear.